We're here today to talk about a really important topic, bone health. And this idea of healthy bones, super bones, but more importantly, how important bone health is to quality of life. I'm joined today by Dr. Adrian Wagg, the Chair of Healthy Aging at the University of Alberta. And let's jump right in. Let's talk a little bit about this idea. Maybe we should start with, Adrian, what is the definition of osteoporosis?
Osteoporosis simply means thinning of the bones, and of such a degree that you're at risk of a fracture. And it's what we call a low trauma fracture. So the typical thing would be a fall usually in an older woman or man, which leads to a wrist fracture, very common, or often sudden loss of height, which are asymptomatic vertebral crush fractures, which occur with osteoporosis.
And so how do you distinguish healthy bones from unhealthy bones?
Healthy bones would be those which support you in your daily activities without causing damage. So a reasonable amount of cortical bone with the strong stuff and without significant loss.
And how do you tell if you have strong bones or not?
Well, unfortunately, like most of these things, you only know when it goes wrong, and that's unfortunate. But again, your peak mass in your 20s, affected by immutable factors like for women, age when your periods start, age when your periods finish, a shorter period of menstruation associated with a higher risk. So estrogen's important, and menopausal. Postmenopausal osteoporosis, very common. Nowadays, a lot of family doctors will have a screening program using bone density scans, either by ultrasound sound waves or by a thing called X-ray densitometry. And you can estimate your risk, as much as you can estimate your fracture risk by taking into account whether you smoke, how much you exercise, your body mass index, your alcohol intake. All of those factors can calculate a fracture risk, and over 10 years, and if you're high enough, we start to treat that.
What can people do to preserve the healthiness of their bones as they age?
For women, postmenopausal women, obviously, well, the first thing that everyone should take living in Alberta or BC is vitamin D. We don't get enough sunlight exposure even when even the summer with the long hours. So everybody should be taking 2,000 units of vitamin D every day. And extra calcium, if you don't have a normal diet, which is with dairy products and non-restrictive, you don't need additional calcium, but 500 milligrams a day of calcium if you think you're low in normal dietary calcium. Not more, because that also affects the hardening of your vascular system, and that's not a good thing.
With more and more people not drinking milk nowadays, or dairy in general, be it to intolerances or otherwise, how does one make sure they get enough calcium? I guess you can obviously take supplements.
That's it. I mean, calcium is largely in cheese and dairy products. So you really are left with supplementation as being the alternative there. As much as we have vitamin D and folate supplementation of diet in other products like breakfast cereals and other stuff, there aren't that many calcium supplemented products available. So taking something is important.
Fair. Okay. And then, so we've talked a little bit about the calcium part. Are there other foods that are good for bone health in general? So vitamin D, calcium, but are there other foods in general people should be eating just to have stronger bones?
I think a decent protein intake, because clearly musculature is important for joint stability and bone health and the ability to exercise. Resistance exercise and stress on the bones is important. There is your bone is consistently turning over, so we don't have the skeleton with which we were born, and it's turned over every few years completely. So making sure that you have a well-balanced diet is important. Making sure that your body mass index is as near normal as possible, although intriguingly, there's estrogens are metabolized in fat. So obese older individuals have higher levels of circulating estrogen, which theoretically improves bone density.
What role does bone health versus muscle health play in all of this? Because obviously they're interlinked, but is there a way to kind of view this when you're thinking about quality of life as you age and maybe parameters? I know you've talked a little bit sometimes with me about like the standing test or the balance, but what are ways that people can not only test their I know that their strength, their quality of aging, if you will, quality of life, and how important is it?
Well, a typical test is that can you stand up from a chair with your arms crossed? Or it is a pretty good rule of thumb to think, well, am I fit enough? People are increasingly sedentary as they get older. Up to 70% of people over 65 will have what we call a sedentary lifestyle. But 70% of them think that they're fit enough to do exercise. Clearly they aren't, and they don't do it. We know there's a decreasing proportion of older people who both partake in healthy aging behaviours, but certainly in physical exercise, which would be that mandated, say, by the Canadian authorities, an hour and a half of moderate physical activity a week. So that's vanishingly rare. Admittedly, 80% of people will do regular exercise when you include walking. But if you take walking out of that, it's less than 50%. And particularly around fracture risk, then we talk about muscle strength, so resistance exercises, but also core and balance exercises to reduce falls risk, because that's the thing that clearly results in fracture. And if you are elderly, fall on the floor, fracture your neck of femur, and have an emergency hip replacement, 1/3 of people will be dead the next year. 1/3 of people won't get back to their same level of mobility. Yeah. So it's not a good thing to have.
Yeah, I know my grandmother, 9 months after she broke her femur.
Yeah.
And it's just like that. Yeah. It is, the falls risk is such a big thing for people, because as soon as they do fall and they do fracture something, it's not always that case, but it's hard.
Leading cause of traumatic death in older people, falls.
Are there other things that you think people should be doing to maintain bone health as they age that we haven't already talked about?
Well, I think getting assessed and screened is the first thing, much like preventive health, because once again, you don't know you've got it until something goes wrong.
Fair.
Yes, you can maintain a healthy lifestyle as much as possible, which will minimize the risk, but there still is a level of risk. So the bone densitometry, assessing your fracture risk is part of that preventive program.
Are there 3, 4, 5 easy steps that we could give people, tips that we could say, look, when you walk off this, here are some practical things you can do to just maintain your bone health?
So I think we've kind of encompassed them. The usual remarks around healthy diet, but vitamin D supplementation, maybe calcium, maintaining a normal body mass index, not smoking, not drinking excessively, and exercise, but exercise not just for resistance and keeping muscle mass, but for balance and core stability too. And then getting the right walking aids if you are a bit mobile, not just a simple cane, but a tripod. And of course in Canada, thinking about the winter.
Yeah. And some use walking sticks and other people use different things. There's so many different ways.
Nordic walking, the tripod sticks are better than the single ones, and then those slip-on soles with little grips on them for when it's icy.
What can people be doing at an earlier age to be thinking about their bone health and just to be more proactive so that they don't get to a point where?
Well, I think the same thing from midlife. And if you want a lifestyle marker in women, it's typical menopause, 52. That's when you should probably start thinking about, okay, there's going to be a downturn in bone density here. What can I do to address that? For men, it's maintaining good, healthy aging behaviors throughout.
I've heard you talk a little bit about the study your colleague did with rats and found the age at which the body probably changes a lot.
So yeah, the animal model thing is slightly flippant. It's difficult. An aged rat isn't the same as an aged human. You can't compress the human lifespan into a 3-year rat. But yes, the changes associated with aging obviously occur more over midlife and post-average reproduction, when we move from reproduction to really maintenance. But as we say, we have an increase in garbage in our body that isn't removed as well, for want of a better phrase. So the effects of aging per se are then the great risk for age-associated disease. So if we can do something about changing the effects associated with aging, and there's good evidence that these healthy aging behaviors can do that, as much as we can possibly do. So there's that study in the Welsh men from the University of Cardiff showing that those people who carried on with the tenets of healthy aging, carried on with their physical exercise and their healthy lifestyle, they were physiologically, so their body systems were 10 years younger at the same chronological age for those who didn't.
Interesting.
So it's not just treating age-associated disease, it's treating the underlying cause of the disease that's important.
Adrian, thanks so much for joining us and talking about healthy bones. It's wonderful. It's obviously great to see you, but it's also super helpful to be learning about all of these different things regularly, because if nothing else, educating and engaging individuals to think about all these little aspects of quality of life just makes such a profound difference. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of OLTV. If you liked what you saw and you want to watch more, like this video and subscribe to the Optima Living channel right here on YouTube.